Hello and welcome to the Two Trees podcast. My name is John Dillon, and I'm sitting here with my finest of friends, Phil Renner.
Good evening.
You looked confused. Are you aware that that's who you are? He's still looking confused.
I don't know what to do with myself.
I don't know what to do.
Now.
He's like, I'm not here. Okay, anyway, we're also here with what's your name again? It's escaping me. Martin Listener.
Yeah, hey y'all.
I thought we were really good friends until the other day when you told me you went hiking with your best friends and did not list me nor invite me, and so
Or anybody else in this room. So
that was hurtful. I just
Sorry.
want you to know, and also my good friend, the Right Reverend Monsignor Nick Church.
Monsignor. Hey, guys.
I haven't actually been on the podcast with Nick, which is kind of surprising because we spend most of the week working together doing random bits of awesomeness wherever it is that we are. But I am excited to be here. This is the Two Trees podcast. We're here to talk about, well, you know what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the weird corners of the Bible. But we're here mostly to talk about Jesus and how Jesus is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the Lord mighty and awesome. And we've been discussing the idea of trees, but this is our first jaunt into the category of giants and demons and ghosts and the pagan gods of the ancient world. And so we're going to take a look at Genesis 6. But before we do that, we do want to acknowledge our fine friend, Jacob Kessling, who is not here because he is traveling. Where did Jacob go?
Georgia.
Well, Georgia. It's
Georgia.
I don't remember all the words, but his son has learned how to fall safely out of airplanes.
He took a
for the
midnight
government.
train.
He's about to learn.
That's what he did.
He's about to learn. He hasn't done it yet.
No, he's about to.
Oh, well, never mind. I'll save my congratulations for another day. But they've turned it into a family vacation, and they're all hanging out down there. So shout out to you, Jacob.
I called him earlier, and I have to say this.
Do it.
Him and his wife were in the hotel room watching How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
That seems like a bad idea.
Have you guys ever seen that movie?
Uh-uh.
That's pretty. You've never seen that movie?
No, never.
Man.
Isn't that the
You guys
one
need a culture
Taming
shock,
the
man.
Shrew? It's based off Taming the Shrew.
I have no idea.
That sounds
Maybe
like a
not.
book. Nick's out.
I'm out of that. If it's not visual, I don't know.
Isn't that Shakespeare?
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're talking
Okay.
about. I mean, it's,
No, this has Matthew.
I feel smart now.
This
Phil
is Matthew
doesn't know his
McConaughey.
name. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
have
no, that's
seen
not
that.
Yeah,
what I'm
Matthew
thinking.
McConaughey and Kate Hudson.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, but I didn't expect to call him and listen to him watching a romantic movie.
I assume they're out doing fun things.
That's what I thought too.
Maybe they're just chilling in the
But they're
hotel
in
room.
a
That's
hotel
okay. You guys do you. You know, if
That's
you want to
right.
watch TV, then that's what
He
you
said,
do.
"Hey, he misses us."
You know, I believe that because we're missable.
Yep.
This is a fun place to be, and we've been missing you, man. Martin, you've been gone for ages and ages. Really, 2 weeks. No one has seen hide nor hair of you. You've been out gallivanting around the countryside and getting sick and taking
a little under the
fancy
weather there for a
dance
while.
classes. Yeah, can you mamba these days?
Nope, I can slow dance
Slow dance. Well, that's good.
and
you know?
tango if I had two of me. But
Two of you.
Yeah.
You,
It takes two to tango.
well,
so.
you have a wife. You know.
Yeah, I guess I could use her. Yeah, that would be a good idea too. To go tango. Yeah, but I've been gone for a little while, and then I've missed it. Just seeing your guys' lovely faces and hanging out, and it's a real spiritual boost whenever we get together. So you can really tell when you're draining low without seeing everybody, and it was nice to come back and get behind this microphone again too.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad Jacob's gone. Don't tell him I said that. No, not really. But we're here today to talk about Genesis chapter 6, and we're going to do that. We tried to do it last night, and I kind of typed up some notes that I thought would help us talk about it, and they were just not usable notes. I let you down is what I did. So hopefully this one will go a little bit smoother. There's just so many rabbit trails you can chase with this that we wound up going round and round in circles. And I really want to give you guys something better for our first taste of the giants that are discussed in the Bible. We know that there are giants in the Bible. Everyone's, I assume, familiar with at least Goliath. And his background is kind of creepy, the Nephilim characters that show up. But even people who aren't even interested in the Bible at all are more familiar with this, I find, than some Christians are. Mm-hmm. And I think that's weird, that they would have keyed in on this biblical idea that most Christians would be surprised to learn is even in their Bible.
Well, I mean, anybody that's watched March Madness knows about David and Goliath, right? That's every year there's a David and Goliath upset with that. But you see it all over movies and entertainment as well. Like there's these just giant creatures. And it's interesting. We talked about, I'm sure we will a little later as well, that the giants are almost always the bad guy, right? Like there's some inherent trait that makes the giants not on the good team in a lot of these movies and stuff. And I think that there's basically become an idea that if that's good for cinema, it's not good for spiritual being, spiritualness and the Christianity lifestyle. So there's definitely a disconnect between people that are trying to stay on the straight and narrow and understanding what these giants and other spiritual creatures' place in the world is. So it's been a fun ride going through this with you guys. Like you mentioned last night, we got down some rabbit trails, so we'll try to keep it on track tonight.
Well, and I think that was good. It helped us pound out our thoughts and things on the issue just to talk about it together. But I do think you're onto something there, that the church seems to be more opposed to Hollywood than it is in favor of the Bible. That we're making our decisions not based on what does the Word of God say, but what is the world around us saying, and just taking stances opposed to things that feel to me to be worldly. And I hear from people all the time, that church attendance is declining and these sorts of things, but interest in the supernatural and the spiritual is way, way up in my experience. Everyone is interested in talking about ghosts and giants and Nephilim, and they have ideas about these things, and they didn't get them from church. And they're always shocked to find that these things are talked about in the Bible. And I'm always kind of curious why the church hasn't leaned into this, that this is something we should have an opinion and a voice that speaks into the supernatural world. Jesus certainly did. He spent a great deal of time casting out demons and talking to his disciples about spiritual things and unseen realities. And I think ultimately it just comes down to the fact that Christians don't read their Bible a whole lot. And then when they do read their Bible, they're not really digging into it as much as they are just skimming for some cross-stitch worthy verse to put up on the wall. Do people still cross-stitch? Is that a thing?
Yeah, definitely. I know.
Are you a cross-stitcher?
I don't cross-stitch.
That would have really changed my opinion of you.
I mean, he's not a 90-year-old woman, so no.
No, I was like, wow, Nick.
But John, you and I kind of grew up in the same background in the religious realm, but like we grew up reading these texts, but we never really were spent time on explaining them or even digging into them. I don't know if that was true for you.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
This text in particular
definitely
came up quite a bit. The school that I went to was very heavy on young earth creationism, and we spent a lot of time talking about evolution and Ken Ham's museum and things there. And so this text would come up, but we never were.
He actually came to my church when I was.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Is he a nice guy?
One of my first ministries back in the 2000s. Yeah. Yeah, he was a nice guy.
Well, I mean, and
I didn't know him like I might.
You didn't
know.
go out to Waffle House afterwards?
No.
Oh, that's disappointing.
We had him in for some creation.
Anyway, to say all that to say, and that's our camps were similar, but
Yeah.
you weren't supposed to ask questions that didn't toe the party line.
Right.
And in my background, it was that these are the sons of Seth, and they married the Canaanite women. And so this is a lesson that if good boys marry bad girls, then God will destroy the world, or that they'll have evil children. And that didn't make any sense to me at all. Like when you read through this text and you're reading through what's going on, first of all, at the very end of it, it says that the Nephilim were in the world after the flood as well. And so was Cain's family wiped out in the flood or not? Because if they were, then there's no way to have that sort of a thing afterwards. So the Sethite theory that I was so very comfortable with, as soon as I actually started reading the text, it fell. It didn't answer the questions. And so we're kind of hoping just to read this passage together, look at some of the words that will cue us into what's happening here, and just kind of take our time. You look furious, Phil. I didn't even do anything wrong. This is your first time on the episode, and your first reaction is to like glare judgingly at me.
That has nothing to do with me being here. It's just your personality.
In his defense, you did start with Phil. You could have started with somebody that's been on the podcast before when you were introducing everybody.
He was closest to me. He's sitting right there. My apologies.
So now it's his fault. Okay.
It's
all Phil's
all right,
fault.
I got you. Phil is perfect and makes no mistakes. Only John makes mistakes. All right, so we're gonna take a look at Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, and you're gonna find this text at the end of a really beautiful genealogy. And it's so much fun. I tried to talk Jacob into doing the genealogy, and he thought we would lose listeners if we did a genealogy, but I think it would be cool. But the meanings of the names and things are important in the genealogy. And you get this idea that the world has really gone downhill since the days of Adam, and they were going downhill pretty quickly, and they've continued to do so. Mankind is violent to its very core, and they're willing to find any means necessary to manipulate other people around them. And ultimately, you're left with a guy named Noah. And Noah's name means rest. And it's in his lifetime that perhaps the most catastrophic event in human history took place, and that's the event of the flood. But before we get into the flood, the Bible gives us a very narrow window into the time period of the pre-flood world. And I've always been fascinated with it because I have a passion for ancient history. And I really wish God had inspired some maps and things to drop into here. That would have been nice, or maybe an extra chapter or two. But instead, what it gives us is a description of how creation more or less came to the breaking point. That God created two worlds, a spiritual world and a physical world, and that there has already been rebellion in both of these realms. In the Garden of Eden, which was a place where heaven met earth, there was a supernatural creature, a cherubim, who deceives Eve and welcomes Adam into a rebellion plot to defile the temple of God, to do things their own way. And it goes badly. Mankind is ejected from the garden. A curse is placed on Satan. And then the world is just left to roll along on its own steam. And it comes to a point sometime between Adam and what's his name? Noah. I wanted to say Moses because I don't know why I keep messing these guys up. In the life of Moses, that there was a additional rebellion in the heavenly world. That there was a group of angelic beings, sons of God, the Bible's going to call them, who leave the supernatural world and attempt to form kingdoms and manipulate power to rule on the earth. Now, we know that God has designed mankind to do that. That's our calling. We are to rule on the earth. These beings wanted to set themselves up as gods upon the earth. And so this is a supernatural rebellion as well as a human rebellion. And so let's dig into this text. And I'm going to explain some of the words as we get to it. And guys, if you have a thought or a rabbit trail or something that you want to pursue as we read the text, let's do it. So Jacob is gone, so I'm going to ask Martin, if you don't mind, to go ahead and read this text.
Sure. Genesis 6, starting right at the beginning.
Yeah, go ahead and read the whole thing, and then we'll go back and run through it.
Okay. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were also on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore children to them. Those were mighty men who were of old, men of renown.
And there we'll stop. So let's go back to that very first phrase. In chapter 6, verse 1, it says, When man began to multiply on the face of the land. And you won't see it in English here, but there's a bit of a rhyme that takes place here. We have a person called mankind, and that word is Adam. When Adam began to multiply on the face of Adamah. Remember, what is Adam made out of?
The dust.
He's made out of the earth. And his name has a real similar sound to it. And so what we have here is that the children of Adam are multiplying at massive rates. They're spreading out all over the world. This text is not dividing mankind into two groups, the Sethites and the Cainites. This is just saying the children of Adam are doing great. They're everywhere. They're multiplying on the face of the land. And that's a good thing, or it's supposed to be. Mankind is supposed to be expanding the garden idea. Remember that wherever we go, we're to be like a tree planted by the waters and offering shade and love and respect and hope for the people that are around us. Instead, what we find is these guys are more like locusts. And wherever they go, they devour. They're messing up other people. That mankind's nature has been turned on its head. And I think we did that naturally all on our own. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot of assistance to help me be a bad person. Do you guys disagree?
I do not disagree.
You do not disagree? Well, that's good. I'm not saying that there wasn't a supernatural push here, but mankind is not getting better. The more time we have, the less likely we are to improve ourselves. Mankind is messing things up. And it says not only was mankind spreading out everywhere, but it does something really interesting, because the genealogy has so far been a list of men and their children, with the exception of Lamech, and his daughter is mentioned. But then we find that it says that the daughters, or benot, are born to them. And so mankind becomes, in this instance, fruitful, beautiful. They have beautiful daughters. God is blessing them, and they have not just sons, but they also have daughters, and those daughters are about to become a point of contention. Are you guys with me so far?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then verse 2 starts, and this is where it gets weird. Everyone's okay with verse 1. Mankind had a bunch of children. Some were boys and some were girls. That's good. Next verse, it says, and the Bene Ha-Elohim, this is a Hebrew phrase, the sons of God. And this phrase, this exact phrase, is used elsewhere in the Old Testament only of supernatural heavenly beings. You'll find variations of this, but this exact phrase does not ever refer to humans. It's always in terms of the supernatural being. Now, does the Bible refer to Israel as sons of God? Yeah, later on it's going to do that in Deuteronomy, but it's not this phrase, Bene Ha-Elohim. And you'll find that in Job, you'll find it in Psalms 89, 82, and Deuteronomy 32. But the sons of God see the daughters of men are attractive. And so here you have a repeat of the language that you find in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, Eve looks at the tree. She sees that the fruit is attractive and good, and she takes it.
So I'd have something to say to that, because Eve only sees that the fruit of the tree, the knowledge of good and evil, is attractive after Satan talks to her, after Satan tempts her with the idea. So I was just sitting here thinking, after I read that, it says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. Mm-hmm. Were they just peering down this whole time, and then all of a sudden they're like, actually, she's actually a pretty nice-looking young lady?
Yeah.
Or what was it? There had to have been some kind of change in their mind or mentality, because if they have the ability to see mankind, they've been able to see them since Adam and through all of the genealogy and stuff. But then all of a sudden there's something that triggers the fact that this is an attractive option for us to take a hold of. So I guess that would be my question. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in on it, but it's just, what is the difference between all the time before this, from creation up until now, and then now that it's attractive to them?
Here we fall into the realm of speculation. Mm-hmm. The text is very narrow into what it talks about. Nick and I were going on about this before. We would really like just a little bit more detail about the reasoning behind some of this stuff. We're not given it. But we do know that these angels that engage in this rebellion against God are chained up. They are removed from the earth. They are bound in chains of darkness. We're going to get to that here in a little bit. But Satan is left to wander the earth. Now, if I was going to be turned loose and God was going to, wouldn't you pick like America's Most Wanted kind of a thing? Like, certainly Satan's on your list. How did you miss this guy? Maybe it's possible. I think perhaps Satan is the guy who tempts these beings into falling into sin, that he woos them into rebellion, just like he wooed Adam and Eve into rebellion. But the language here is identical. That see and take language is there to show you that this is an ongoing rebellion in the heavens, that they step down. They see the daughters of man, and that word man is Adam. They see the daughters of Adam, the Benot Ha-Adam, and that they were attractive.
So in the same way that Eve is the person getting tempted, and the fruit is the subject, or the apple, or whatever you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now it is the other spiritual beings are Eve in the situation, and the fruit is mankind, or
the
specifically
daughters of
the
Eve.
women.
Yeah, this has become even worse than it was in the beginning. This isn't just one. This is across the board. This is loads of opportunities to abuse others that's being taken place here, and so it's increased tenfold in its evil and in its audacity.
But it's still Satan up to the same tricks.
I think
Just
so.
using
At
different
the very
members.
least, I mean, is it possible that these angels decided to do this on their own? Sure, that's possible. That's entirely possible. I'm not saying that they need Satan to do that. I'm simply saying his absence is odd.
And when you're like me and you're trying to figure out the why, like we were discussing prior to this, is why would these creatures want to do this in the first place? What would make sense? I'm trying to think through it logically, and we had a good conversation about it, which hopefully we'll get into a little bit later. But it's just why, and then the timing. Why did it take up until now for them to finally see that they were attractive? The same way Eve was in the garden for however long, and then finally understands, man, that fruit is good to be eaten. Let's go ahead and take it.
To know that, we would have to know a little bit about the nature of angels, and we don't. We just don't have any idea exactly how this works. We do know from modern times that in the realm of the occult, and Nick, you've watched every horror film there is, so you may have an opinion here, but there are rules to the way the supernatural world engages with the physical world. I've never heard of anybody being accidentally possessed. If you're interested in the topic of possession, we're going to talk about it later. A really great book is, what was the name of the book that you recommended?
Playing with Fire.
Playing with Fire is a great book about it. But you have to purposefully open doors in the pursuit of these things. And what we find here is that these angels find a ready audience, ready to engage with them in their rebellion against God Most High, and that they are welcomed into their families. And so the idea is that these women are traded, more or less. We don't have the word for rape here. We have the word for wife here. The idea is that they are given, perhaps in exchange for knowledge, in exchange for power, in exchange for favor. Go ahead, Nick.
This is just maybe this is a rabbit trail, and we don't have to look at it, but just looking into the context of what maybe, like, I was just looking up the word, and I'm not going to try to say it because I'll slaughter it, but the Hebrew word for wives there. And
Isa?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually just means women. So are we talking like an actual, angelic being having sexual relations with women, or are we referring to a possession? They saw that they looked beautiful, and they're like, I'm going to possess that body. Is that...
Yeah. So Nick and I have gone back and forth on this, and the answer that we've come away with is we don't know.
That's what we don't know. That's right. But it's just interesting.
I think that they were physically there, in the same way that when Abraham feeds the angels that come from the tree of Moreh, that they're physically there, and that he's that there's a physical representation of this kind. We know that angels can do this.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
We know that if, for instance, a demon were to possess a woman, that's not going to initiate a pregnancy.
Yeah.
And so there's more going on here, but everything that's going on here is abnormal. It's not intended by the maker of the universe, and it's going to result in a purposeful twisting of his world. The supernatural world is bound in certain ways to protect mankind. We are given a hedge of protection. Even the ignorant are protected from things that they don't know and can't see around them. It's when we start purposefully, and this is why the Bible warns us not to do this, not to involve ourselves in speaking to the dead or in things like calling out to spirits that are around us, because there are spirits around you. And it seems as though there are elements of protection that are placed on us, but we don't know what they are. We're not told what they are. It's almost as though God put us into motion, set protections around us, and said, if you don't go near the fence, you'll be just fine. But if you go sticking your arm through the holes here, I don't promise that a T-Rex won't come and grab you up and take you off. And I think the reason that Christians are really uncomfortable with this goes back to something, Martin, that you said a long time ago, And that is that if we really did believe that there were powers of darkness around us, our behavior would be different. We would take actions to pray for our children and for our families. I mean, we buy bullets for our guns, but we don't bother defending. Every night when I go to bed, I lock the doors, I check the windows, I put the dogs in their place, so that they can sound the alarm, and those sorts of things, just because out of a want to protect my home. Why isn't it that a Christian father is just as adamant about praying over his children, or in making sure that we're defending ourselves, making sure that we're not bringing in things that will put us in harm's way in terms of the satanic into our own homes? Because we say we believe these things and then we don't act like it.
Yeah, and I think that again just goes to the application part of me. Is I think that's why we're doing what we're doing, and each of us on our own individual journeys in the texts here is realizing we may not know all the answers, but the fact is there is something there, and we have responsibility as God's children with a higher power, a higher spirit, the spirit to war and battle with.
To wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities. It's the expectation that we are going to.
Absolutely.
And Christians are shocked by this. Like, that would never happen to me. Well, it's supposed to be the normal frame of life. We are wrestling against these things. And in this instance, these guys broke the rules in a huge way. And the Lord seems to have gone nuclear on the situation. We don't find this happens much afterwards at all. And I think it's partially because of the way that the Lord responds to this. He doesn't do it in a way. For instance, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, they are more or less treated innocently.
Right.
They're pushed outside the garden. God says, "Don't worry, buddy. I'm going to send the Redeemer. It's going to be okay. I'm going to take care of this." These beings may have been under the opinion that they could manipulate God. And if God's going to go so easy on them, we're obviously better than they are. And so the Lord would go,
why is he not easy on us?
Yeah, and so they seem to have attempted to manipulate both mankind and God, and thought to themselves, it's not as bad as it looks. I'm going to do this my own way. I'm going to treat these people as though they're fruit to be picked and to be used and manipulated myself, and I'm going to become like God. But ultimately, what they did is they overstepped the bounds of holiness, and they are just wiped out. Yeah. The Bible, we're going to get into this here at the end, but what they do is so horrific that the Lord responds in a way that he's never responded ever since. There really is like this nuclear feel to what's happening.
And I want to go into what you mentioned about with the fence analogy, and you're reaching your hands through the fence with that, because if you look in verse 2, and it says, "And they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose." In the notes that we were going over, it mentions that, kind of implies that these families were maybe trading their daughters or bartering with these creatures or these heavenly beings that have maybe more intellect or more secret knowledge or something that the human beings would find as worthwhile. So these humans are sacrificing their daughters or their lives or whatever it is to gain some of this knowledge and power. But in what I read in the text is it says that these spiritual beings or these sons of God took for themselves whoever they chose. So I'm reading that as like they're using force to take their pick of the litter because there's nothing that the humans can do to stop them.
Yeah, it's a common view. A lot of people think that, and honestly, the text is slim here. It doesn't give us a lot about this. We don't seem to have that recorded for us in the Jewish legends, in books like Enoch and Jubilees and those sorts of things where we find this talked about. Instead, what we find is that when these beings came to earth, they found ready followers. It wasn't that they needed to be convinced. When they saw these beings, they were in. All they needed to do was say, "Give me this," and they gave it. There was no need for them to do other than desire, and their desires were met. Mankind was eagerly pursuing, pleasing these lowercase g gods, these Elohim, and they set themselves up as powers in the world. We know from the books like Enoch, and Book of Enoch is not scripture, but it is quoted in the Bible. And it is an important book because it shows us the way that ancient peoples thought about this event. It talks about how these beings came to the earth and gave gifts of knowledge. forbidden knowledge or secret knowledge, and that's the whole concept of the occult.
It says it gave them like charms and enchantments and stuff.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
so they come willing to give gifts. And so I know we talked about this a little bit ago, and more or less Martin just really wants this to be the answer. And so I can't say that it isn't. I will say that no other texts really go into detail much about that.
But again, I think the important part of what
Is
we are
that Martin
discussing.
thinks that.
Yeah, no. The important part is what you mentioned about the people on earth or mankind is willing and ready for these people to come in and take over with that. So basically, mankind still holds the key, because we had a good conversation. The spiritual beings, or the Elohim, they are above us with their attributes. Like they're stronger, they're faster, more athletic, they're more intelligent. But they don't have the authority part. And I know we've talked about this on several podcasts in the past, but this is, I think, where the authority really comes into play. We talk about having dominion over the earth. It's kind of also dominion over them, because they could easily squash us if they could, but for some reason there's some kind of force field or something, like you mentioned, the hedge of protection, even for the ignorant. But it's like there's something that's up, and all we have to do is say, no, okay, we're going to let down the shield, and then they can easily come in and do whatever they want with it. But again, it's our decision, I guess, is what I'm getting from this conversation.
God made man to rule in this world, and he didn't tell us much about the other world. And I think the reason for that is because he takes care of it. He is the shepherd, and we're the sheep. And he has placed hedges of protection, if you want to use that phrase out of Job, there, that if you go looking for things that go bump in the night, you may find them because they're real. But you don't have to worry that, if you really are pursuing God and you're not sticking your head into hornets' nests and things like that, the idea that, you got possessed because you walked past the wrong cemetery doesn't happen. It's the result of a heart that willingly partners with the powers of darkness, with the princes of evil. And that idea, that willingness to give up authority to another. And even when you look at Satan in his temptation of Jesus, that's what he wants Jesus to do. He doesn't say, I'm just going to kill you, because Jesus was in physical form at the time. He probably was susceptible to violence in that way. But instead what he wants is, I want you to worship me. I want you to worship me. That seems to be the drive of these beings. They want to be worshiped. That's what Satan wanted when we read the I wills of Satan. It isn't just that he wants to wield power. It's that he desires to be above others, to be willingly embraced as greater than they are.
And so when we talk about the modern Christian, I guess, or however you want to say it, when you were talking about the church earlier, is it more beneficial to remain ignorant to this idea and just have the faith that, God will protect us as long as we don't go poking our heads into hornets' nests? Or is it better to have this knowledge and understanding of, like, that's the hornet's nest. Don't go poking your head into it.
I think it's far better to know the danger than to be ignorant of it.
I would agree personally, because I'm a very curious person, right? And so it'd be hard for me to just say, just don't touch that fence and you're fine. As soon as someone tells me that, I'm walking straight over to that
Well, let me
fence,
ask you, okay, so someone grew up in a secular world, they don't go to church, they don't read their Bible. Are they still familiar with the occult?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, you can't live in our world and not rub up against it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of ghosts and ghouls, like you were telling a story today about someone who was talking to you at work about ghosts. Yeah. And I have no idea about their background, but I can tell you right now that happens to Nick and I on a consistent basis. And if you get most Christians alone and you really ask them, hey, have you ever experienced anything weird? A lot more will tell you, absolutely I have, than would stand up and say amen in the middle of the service. It's a large percentage of Christians, but we don't talk about it because, I don't know, church doesn't have a place for it.
And so it seems like the church has taken the stance, and I'm just saying in generalities, that it's better to just remain ignorant about it. By their actions.
Or to say stupid things like, oh, they read Harry Potter, and the next thing you know, they're possessed. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. There really are dangers out there, and the churches that really I spent a lot of time hanging out with are busy fighting over hills that have nothing to do with a battle that's presently taking place, and that's why they're disconnected both from culture and from the fight. They're holding ground like 5 or 6 miles back behind the battle line. And they're very pleased with themselves, but they're in no way, shape, or form engaged in what's going on right now. And so if you are going to work in a world where the demonic is active, you need to understand, first of all, that there is a demonic, that it's not a game. How many people have a story because they played with a Ouija board when they were little and they thought it was a game? I mean, it was put out by a game company.
Yeah.
Today it's, ghost hunting and things like that, calling out into the darkness. Is anyone here? Well, yeah. It may not be a ghost, but there are things around you all the time. And if you're opening doors of communication, you may get communication back. And it's not interested in you filming it. It's not interested in providing proof to you. It's interested in power. It's interested in manipulation of you. And our culture is heavily enchanted with this idea of what does the supernatural world have that I can be involved in, because our world has been stripped of meaning to such an extent that our culture is rebounding back from this base materialism, and they're looking for supernatural explanations.
And a great example of this, and I can't believe I'm going to say this because it's so embarrassing that I know this fact, but in the show The Vampire Diaries, which I have seen every episode of, but I didn't need to say that. But anyway, the vampires can't come into your physical home unless they are invited in, which is kind of the same idea that we were talking about. It's like, well, where did they get that idea about the vampires can't get in unless you invite them? It's similar to what we were just talking about. And so in that show, there's several ways that they manipulate somebody into inviting them into their house.
Yeah.
They'll say something else and be like, can I come in? Yes. Okay.
Well, almost all cultures have a story about an angelic-like being who brought gifts to mankind and was elevated and honored and worshipped because of it. Why? Why is that in almost every culture that you can think of? First of all, it makes sense that it would happen. And I think it makes sense because it did happen. This is part of the history of the world that we live in. And if you're going to reach into the supernatural world and you're going to get information, those beings were there for some of this. Though you're not talking to beings that are 2 or 3 weeks old. Like you're dealing with a shared culture that isn't physical, but it's supernatural. For instance, we have pyramids on every continent there is to find the things on. We've got stories of dragons everywhere that you can possibly imagine. There are things that people look at and we say, there must have been a universal human culture that settled all the corners of the world. Except we can't find it, right? We can't find any evidence of that other than the fact that this is all too eerily similar. What about this? And what if there is a culture that spreads from corner of the earth to corner of the earth, but it's not physical, it's supernatural? That when every one of those cultures was reaching into the demonic, into the angelic world, they were talking to beings with a similar background and history. And the reason that they came up with there's a reason that the Indian mounds here share such a striking similarity to the ones that are in Scotland or the ones that are in Central Europe. It's because there were every one of these people reaching into the darkness and trying to say, is anyone home?
And that brings up the analogy with the stars.
Yeah.
Right. There's several movies and cute little things of, look up at the moon, and you could you could be on the other side of the world, look up at the moon, and you're looking at the same thing as the guy on the other side of the world. So if they're praying to these spiritual beings, which they would have classified as stars, the ancients, you could be looking at the same star or reaching out to the same spiritual being on the opposite side of the world and get the same answer back. And that could be why, explaining the pyramids or the dragons and so many different ideas of, this universal stuff. Because I've been really getting into that with a guy I work with a lot too. He's got a lot of questions about it. So I love discussing that with him and understanding, like, how did somebody thousands of miles away with no internet, no phone, no smoke signals that could reach that far, understand the same exact material that this other guy did, even 1,000 years before.
And they took it super serious. Like, stargazing was not something that you did on the weekend. Like, the ability of these peoples, regardless of what continent or nationality, to track the movement of the heavens was unbelievably complex. And it's not just because they thought it was cool, it's because they thought it was religious. It's because there was an element of worship involved here. And they were reaching out. Is there someone there who desires to communicate with us? And the answer is yeah. Yeah, there is.
So getting back to our text here, in Genesis 6, we don't know a ton of stuff on the demonic realm, the fallen, and so just bits and pieces. But can we find a purpose of why they did this?
I think you have to come away with, and you and I have wondered about this before. I really want more information.
Right.
I really do. But I think ultimately you have to say that the motivation was pride.
Yeah.
It was a desire to be lifted up higher than the others.
Could it have anything to do with
To have something that was theirs.
Because my mind is going to the end where God does he wipes it out. There had to have been something. It's almost as if to me, Satan was close to getting what he wanted, which was to ultimately pollute the genetic the genetic field of humans. That ultimately he knew, if I could do this, if I can get into this realm, the promised seed could not come from.
Yeah, God gave a promise to Eve, and he said, your seed,
Yeah.
the seed of the woman, will unseat the serpent.
Yeah.
And many people wonder if this isn't a satanic attempt to pollute the line of humankind. What if we hit the point where there's no line for him to come?
That's where I'm at.
And I love it because, and this is what's to me so wonderful about the book of Genesis, and I hope that you guys are taking this because sometimes the realm of Christian weirdness gets ugly. Just love your Bible, man. If the Bible doesn't specifically give you an answer, embrace and lean into the mystery of it. And be excited about what God has given you and ask the weird questions. And if my answers don't satisfy you, they just tick you off, then I'm just glad I got to be part of the conversation. And I think that's what we've got here. But I don't think we are served by just saying, well, this is the godly line of Seth. And when a good boy marries a bad girl, the world falls apart.
And Nick, I love what you just said there because my mind is racing 100 miles an hour. The biggest question I had is what I said at the beginning. Why are the women so attractive to them now? And you talk about Satan being the tempter and this, that, and the other. This spot in history had to have been the closest that Satan got to winning, I would think, because of what we just mentioned, right? So if you're another angelic being and you see Satan gaining ground on God and gaining momentum and this, that, and the other, how much would it be like, okay, I'm going to go on this guy's side now instead of God Almighty?
And I'm just speculating here too because, okay, so these angelic fallen angels see these women and they're beautiful. I mean, automatically, do you think these beings are automatically going back and going, oh, I know what happened in the garden. That man fell for a woman. So if I can take a woman and be beautiful like that, I got man. I've ruined the race.
It's a good plan, and it's the more you look at it, the more you realize, and even the consequences of it. I don't know if Satan even knew this, but when they have children,
right,
they're not normal.
Right,
they're a hybrid being of part spirit being and part human being. They're neither angel nor human, and the ancient Jewish people believed that this was the origin of demons. If you read the book of Enoch, that's what it's going to say. You read a lot of places that talk about unclean or bastard spirits. That's what they're talking about, earthborn. So that when these Nephilim, and the word here in the Septuagint is giant, gigantes is how they translate this word. And that's how the ancient Jews viewed this. It wasn't just mean guys or of polygamous leaders. There's nothing in the text here that indicates polygamy. Instead, what you have here is that there is a weird hybrid being that's made that's neither of this world nor of the next. And it is at war with God by its very nature. They are like their father, the devils, in that sense. And so I use the word demonic really just to mean bad, an evil spirit being. But we really don't know what a demon is. The Bible doesn't give us a verse that says demons are fallen angels. And the ancient peoples had lots of opinions about this. I think if you really got specific, there's a lot of sense in that. It makes sense to me. That's the way that a lot of passages of Scripture talk about it. But it says here in verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. When the sons of God, the Bene HaElohim, came in to the daughters of Mem, the Benat HaAdam, the daughters of Adam. This is not the Sethites. This is what happens when an angelic being has relationship with an earthly woman. They bore children to them, and these children were, well, they were messed up. They were what the ancient cultures revered as the greatest mankind ever produced, the most violent, the strongest, the most powerful. And here, the writer of Genesis is linking into the stories like Gilgamesh or Hercules and those kinds of things. These are demigods. These are half god, half human, or Gilgamesh. I think he's 1/3 human and 2/3 god, and they make a big deal about that. But it's the presence of semi-divine hero stories in these cultures. And they says, listen, there's a basis for these. There really were abnormal human beings walking the earth, and they were giants. How big do you have to be a giant? I have no idea.
Bigger than everybody else.
Bigger than everybody else. So the book of Enoch describes them almost in like jolly green giant status. We don't have any evidence for that. There's no doubt that Goliath is a giant, and he measures in around 9 feet tall or 6 feet something, depending on how long your cubit is there. But the idea isn't so much the height as much as it is this is a different kind of creature. This is not just a human. This is an embodied demonic spirit. And they're filled with incredible violence and rage. And at this point, the world has lost control. It's spiraling into hate, into violence, and it's going to end in either cannibalism, where everyone just kills off each other, or that God is going to bring about a saving grace.
It just makes it. I don't know. This stuff just makes sense. Like, I mean, you guys know I'm a big movie buff, but like, I mean, all our Marvel and DC comic movies are all on, Thor, and these guys who are half beings, So there's something to it that
I think
the
there's
world
a reason
knows.
that it resonates so deeply
Yeah.
with humanity, and it's not new.
No.
Like, it's not new at all. Every culture you can think of has got this going on in it. And there's a reason for that, I think, because it happened. And they're remembering that this happened. And so kind of what the biblical author here is saying is, hey, remember all your heroes? The best that you guys had to offer? Yeah, our God beat them.
Yeah.
All of them. What hero do you have that compare to my God? What strength do you have before the Lord of hosts? Which of your heroes survived the flood that came onto the earth? The Lord leveled the playing field. You have no one who is able to resist the coming of the Lord of hosts. And this idea of a polemic of God the victor is missing in so many Christian stories. We're just not there. Are you looking at the time?
Yeah, I wanted to know how much deeper we could go because I got a lot of questions.
We're past our.
This is definitely going to be part 2 or maybe even 3.
Yeah,
so.
we want to get just a little bit farther. Let's shoot for the 1 hour. Is that okay? Can we do 12 more minutes and
here
just
all day.
hit these 2 other passages? We're going to do a couple episodes on giants because we're really just now getting to the point where I feel like we've at least provided a biblical framework that a spiritual rebellion took place.
Yeah.
We may not understand everything about it, but giants are real. What you call them or how big they were and those sorts of things are not always told to us. The best description we get is of Goliath, and we can zero in on him a little bit later. But the Bible talks about what happened to these angelic beings that rebelled in the days of Noah in the New Testament, in the books of Peter, in the books of Jude, and I believe in the book of Revelation. And so we've got just a couple minutes, and there's a passage in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 5. Phil, do you mind reading that and just kind of jumping in here a little bit? He's flipping through the pages. It's up here on the screen as well for you. The part that's in black, skip the red.
Phil's the only one that brings an actual Bible here. We all have our devices out.
Phil is old school, baby.
He's flipping through. If you need me to find it, I was at one time the fastest sword driller in Miami County.
Oh,
So I have to say that every time.
well, that would be useful because my 6-year-old can beat me pretty easily. But I'll just take it off the
She's
screen.
pretty smart, though, so I'll give you some slack.
Just don't tell her that. I'm disappointed in you.
I thought it was pretty good.
All right. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly.
So that to me is linking these two events. There was an angelic rebellion that took place during the lifetime of Noah, and God did not spare the angels when they sinned. So the topic here is that of angels that have rebelled against God. And their sin was so great that they were not permitted to wander the earth. They were cast into hell, which means grave. Tartarus, I think, is the word that's used here. And that word has all kinds of Greek connotations, and the Titans and that kind of thing. We could get into. It's about the only time you find this word in the New Testament. But it's saying, listen, God didn't mess around with this. This was taken very, very seriously, and they were committed to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept in judgment until the judgment, which is like the events towards the end of humanity. And I think you actually see this in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 9, verses 1 through 11. We won't read it here. Maybe we'll do it on another episode, but take a minute and take a look at that. We have angelic, demonic creatures coming up out of a bottomless pit. And we find a couple places in Revelation where angels have been chained. Who are these guys? What did they do? They got them chained up. Again, the same question is, how did Satan avoid getting chained up? Was he just like more sneaky, like God couldn't find him? I refuse to believe that. I think that the will of God is accomplished, period. And so these angels did something that got them chained up that Satan didn't do, even though he may have masterminded this. But the idea is that these beings were judged because of what they did.
And the interesting part, first of all, the verse is awesome. Like, it's such a cool, descriptive, and just a really cool verse to read through. But the interesting part is the angelic beings rebel against God. Similar, or maybe in the same fashion, that the human beings rebelled against God in the garden. But we hinted on it earlier. The human beings kind of get away with it, if you will, with that, because their punishment is, they're out of Eden, but they're still able to go on their own reconnaissance and multiply through the world and have dominion over it. Mm-hmm. So realistically, their punishment is nothing compared to what the angelic beings have for punishment, which is hell and chains until they're obliterated, basically.
Yeah, well, in the book of 1 Peter, it talks about how Christ descends into hell and preaches to the angels, to the spirits who are in bondage and chains. And it connects him there again to the days of Noah. And so you get this idea that Jesus descends into hell, not a captive, but he goes in and he's just like grinning. And he's like, I've got the power now, boys. Like, this place is mine. You tried to stop me from coming, and I took it. Death and hell and Hades have no power. I have the keys to all of this that exists. And you almost get this idea. It says he takes captivity captive, that idea of like a triumphal entry, as his captives trail behind him in the Roman sense of a triumphal entry. It's just, man, when you read this, you get this impression that God is not meek and mild, but this is the Lion of Judah unveiled. This is the power of God being wielded. And that when angelic powers rise up to resist him, he tears them down. The way he's doing that now, I think, is through the church. He's allowed us to be part of this, not because he has to, but he's given us a job. We're to take ground. We're to hold territory and to preach the gospel and act in a way that is war against the darkness.
And that really answers my question, because again, why does God put the kid gloves on when he's dealing with human beings, but he throws the sledgehammer down against the spiritual beings, right? Because we have the same authority that you're mentioning that Jesus portrays, is that we can fight back these powers and principalities with the way that we act and the way that we, provide the gospel to those who don't know, and the way we pray and the way we do all this spiritual warfare that you're talking about. We need to be dug into the trenches. That's why we aren't chained up the same way that the angels go. That's my take from what we're discussing here.
And what I really like about this too is that here in this text, where we have so many different opinions and whatnots, you have the first mention of grace in Genesis 6,
Yeah.
where Noah found favor. And right in the middle of this text. And then not only that, but you go to the 2 Peter passage too. And it describes a bunch of different things about the wicked and what God is
The
doing.
Lord knows how to deliver them. Yeah.
The Lord knows how to deliver them. So
And-
you find grace
Yeah.
all over this.
And even then, when we talk about spiritual warfare today, it's not through like throwing holy water around and smacking people in the forehead. It's through acts of forgiveness. It's through attempts of love and compassion and being joyful and resisting the darkness as it swells around us. Those are blows against the demonic, against the evil forces that try to hold us at bay. And even though the enemy that we face today is different, I think these beings were chained up. Jude 1:6 says that pretty clearly. There were other demons or other evil beings who were quick to take their place. There's no shortage of problems in the world, but the ability to turn your eyes on Jesus, knowing that we're at war, knowing just like Peter that the waves are high, but to fix your eyes on Christ so that you don't sink, that is warfare. That takes power. That takes determination to do. And we're going to wrap up here. We're closing in on the 1 hour, but let's end with the phrase here in Jude 1:6. This is from Jude, the brother of Jesus, and this is a really great book. He quotes from the book of Enoch, which is a book about the Watchers and the Giants. But just as a summary verse here of what we've been talking about, what does Jude say about this? Would one of you guys read verse 6?
And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains until under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day.
There it is. There are angels who rebelled against God by leaving their sphere of influence, their proper dwelling within the spiritual world. And because of this, God has chained them up until the great day. These beings committed a sin so great that God removed them from the playing field. Again, that's grace. We've not faced this, and I praise God for it. The world is messy enough as it is, without the additional help that these beings would have brought. And I got to look at this and in the end just lean back and say, my God is wonderfully, beautifully, powerfully present in my life. And he has protected me, and he has guided me, and that even though the demonic world may rise up in all of its mystery and darkness and fog, there is a light in the darkness that overcomes the darkest of night. Our God, our Jesus, is the God of gods, the Lord of lords. I did not mean to push that button. Meant to push this button. Mighty and awesome. Jesus, I'm sorry for pushing that button. Please forgive me.